Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with another Friday Rambling because it is Friday, and thus it is time to ramble. Now, we're going to sit there and do something we've not done for a little while, and that is we're going to discuss DC Comics. Specifically, we're going to discuss the history of a legacy identity. Now, those of you who are not familiar with comic books, the term legacy identity refers to a superhero or villain identity. In the case of tonight's entry, superhero by and large, that is used by multiple people, usually in an inherited sense of, hey, I'm going to be this hero for a while, I die/retire, I pass the torch and costume and name onto somebody else. This is something that DC Comics, more so than Marvel, is very well noted for doing. Marvel does occasionally legacy identities out, but DC is much more well known for it. Now, that's neither a pro nor a con thing. Certainly not trying to pick sides here. I do enjoy material from both companies. Just laying out some foundation. So what legacy identity are we going to discuss? We're going to discuss one that goes back to the earliest years of crime-fighting comics. Don't you mean superhero comics? No, I mean crime-fighting comics because in the earliest days, just because you had a crazy name and a mask didn't mean you had superpowers. Didn't even mean you were necessarily super crazy high tech. Sometimes you just wanted to get the job done, even if you had to do it yourself. These characters were often referred to as by the term mystery men, or referred to as mystery men, that being the two different sentences I was trying to say at once, to emphasize the fact that it was their identity that was mysterious, not to mention that their way of getting the job done, since there were not superpowered villains either, was capturing criminals whose crimes were too mysterious for the police to solve in and of themselves. It works on multiple levels. Mystery Man. It is the era of the Mystery Men where we start off our discussion of the Sandman. Because our first Sandman is known as Wesley Dodds. Now, given that this was the late 30s, Wesley Dodds was attired in a green business suit, fedora, and gas mask. As in the old style, full cover, big eyes. Oh, brilliant, stuck out right there. That kind of gas mask. Now, he wasn't just wearing the gas mask because it was a good way to cover up his identity. He, in fact, had a gun that would shoot out knockout/sleeping gas, hence the term Sandman, as in, Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream. Do-do-do-do. And that's all I'm going to sing before I get either copyright struck or everybody quits listening because I am not a professional singer. Now, Wesley Dodds would feature in comic books regularly for 7 years. And in that last couple years there, would develop into more of a standard superhero, becoming a founding member of the Justice Society of America. He never necessarily gained superpowers, but his costume did take on more of a Superman-esque feel to it, as well as his tools becoming a little more high-tech and borderline sci-fi future tech. Now, we did mention he became a founding member of the Justice Society of America. Again, quick little recap for those who are not super familiar with comic books. The Justice Society of America was formed by the superheroes of the 1940s. And when the idea of the multiverse came about during the subsequent second generation of heroes, aka the Silver Age, was later stated to reside on Earth 2. This is important to note for some of our later Sandmen. That until the 1980s Crisis on Infinite Earths turned the multiverse into a single universe, most of your Sandmen are going to operate on Earth 2. Important to keep in mind, folks. He would, by the end of his adventures, also pick up a sidekick, Sandy the Golden Boy. And as I said, he was finished by 1946 as, a lot of things were going on in the comics industry. Superhero / crime fighting comics in general started falling out of vogue. So a lot of superhero books were just getting canceled, and it happens. But the idea of the Sandman was dusted off in the 70s, specifically by comic book icons Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. This was a brand new character and ran for 6 issues. After the first issue, the stories were written by Michael Fleischer. Second and third issues were illustrated by Ernie Chua. Inks were by Kirby, Mike Royer, and in the 6th issue, Wally Wood. All covers were, however, done by Jack Kirby. Now, in the 1970s version, this Sandman was said to be the literal Sandman of popular myth, appearing as a superhero because that was the trendy thing to do at the time. This Sandman, originally, as I said, being the Sandman of myth, did not have a human civilian identity, and his superheroics consisted of basically enforcing the dream dimension, preventing various nightmare-based antagonists from giving children dreams that were too scary for them to handle. In fact, there being implication that one in particular, the Nightmare Wizard, was capable of giving children dreams so scary that they could die in those dreams from their fear. In his adventures, the Sandman was assisted by 2 kidnapped nightmares who were serving basically a form of, probation would be a good parallel. These nightmares being known as Brute and Glob, who were kept in special cells until Sandman blew on a little whistle to release them temporarily when he needed their help. Keep this in mind for later, because it's all one big continuity. It's all going to tie in together. Now, as I said, his series only ran for 6 issues, which is not bad considering when Simon and Kirby originally wrote issue 1, it was a self-contained story, as they had no intentions of writing subsequent issues. They were just doing something to do something for a month. Now, it is said that the Sandman can use his abilities to temporarily enter the real world. And among his tools was a pouch of dream dust, which he can cause anyone to fall asleep immediately. Sandman's most frequently protected child was a young boy named Jed, who lived with his grandfather, Ezra Paulson. This will be noted for later. Years later, after the character's retirement, in Wonder Woman number 300 by Roy Thomas, another comic books icon. This being released in February of 1983, Sandman is revealed to actually be Dr. Garrett Sanford. This being a retcon! Woo! We've done videos before about retcons. Something to check the archives for if you're not familiar with how great retcons can be. So, what are the full details of this retcon? Well, here we go, folks. Dr. Garrett Sanford was a UCLA psychology professor who became trapped in the dream dimension while saving the life of a great man, heavily implied to be a U.S. president, who was in a coma while being terrorized by a powerful nightmare monster. This issue and the following appearance note for the first time that his appearances outside the dream dimension were strictly limited to 1 hour, because physically entering the dream dimension was a one-way process. Despite this, Sanford nevertheless tries to romance Diana / Wonder Woman, in spite of her acceptance of Steve Trevor's proposal of marriage, and the issue also introduced Hippolyta Trevor, who is the daughter of the Earth 2 Wonder Woman and Steve Trevor. Told you that Earth 2 thing was important to remember. It comes up again and again. Continuity. We love you. Sandman also becomes an honorary member of the Justice League in a subsequent story released later that year, written by Paul Levitz and Len Wein. Again, 2 huge names. In which they fought Dr. Destiny, a villain who also had dream-based powers. Sanford is an honorary member because he declines full membership due to the fact that he cannot leave the dream dimension for more than an hour at a time, and thus only dream power-based villains, such as Dr. Destiny, were the only ones he could really help the Justice League deal with in any major way. This would be it for our second Sandman. The third Sandman shows up in a series known as Infinity Inc. Infinity Inc. was seen as a companion series to Justice Society of America, as all of the founding members of Infinity Inc. were the children of Justice Society of America members. This made them the Earth 2 equivalent of Earth 1's Teen Titans, who were sidekicks to the Justice League in their original variation. Iteration, probably a better word there. Specifically, one member of Infinity Inc. was Hector Hall, aka the Silver Scarab, who was the son of the Golden Age Hawkman. Hawkman is a huge pile of worms that involves too many retcons, and we will deal with him in a subsequent video. But for now, Hector Hall, son of Carter Hall, had a career in Infinity Inc. as a Silver Scarab. By the end of the Infinity Inc. series, however, Hector Hall had gone a little mad and died. He later shows up in the dream dimension, working with Brute and Glob as a legacy to the Sandman identity. And it is here that it is revealed that Garrett Sanford had in fact gone insane due to the loneliness of the dream dimension and committed suicide, and in fact was using Sanford's body as his own had died off so he could physically enter the real world for that 1 hour at a time. Now here's your real big continuity fun. Remember, we said Garrett Sanford briefly tried to woo the Earth 2 version of Wonder Woman. The Earth 2 version of Wonder Woman had a daughter with Steve Trevor known as Hippolyta Trevor. Hippolyta was also a member of Infinity Inc. under the codename of Fury, and was the lover of Hector Hall. And in fact, it was during his period as Sandman that he would use that 1 hour a day real-world visitation to continue his loving ways with Hippolyta, including in the most intimate and physical manner. This is important to note for later. Originally, Hector Hall was only seen a couple times in Infinity Inc., operating as the Sandman, as the series was canceled shortly after this revelation. However, a few years later in Neil Gaiman's Sandman series, it is further revealed that the dream dimension was in fact a pocket dimension in the mind of Jed Walker from the Garrett Sanford era, which was created by Brute and Glob, who were explained as being two former servants of Dream/Morpheus, who we will go into more detail in just a second, that had escaped his realm during the Lord of Dream's long absence. Hall had, in fact, died some years before during the Silver Scarab thing, and that his incarnation as the Sandman is basically similar to a ghost haunting a house. That his spirit should have moved on to the proper afterlife, but Brute and Glob were manipulating him, and the sleeping Jed Walker as a way of avoiding detection by Morpheus. Morpheus would eventually find them, be the one to reveal that this was all going on, drag Brute and Glob back to the dreaming proper, and help Hector Hall go to the afterlife where he should have been a long time ago. Morpheus himself was the next person to use the Legacy Sandman, although more often than not that was simply the title of the book, as 90% of the time characters referred to him either as Morpheus or Dream. He did admit to occasionally being called the Sandman, as he was the inspiration for the Sandman of myth. And there is a reference very early on in the series that Morpheus's hobby was collecting nicknames. Thus, Dream, Morpheus, Sandman, a few others that were basically Neil Gaiman tapping into mythology around the world, and a few fictional gods that make sense within the DC universe, such as one of the members of the Martian Pantheon, that we see the Martian Manhunter when he gets involved in one of Dream's adventures briefly. Excuse me. Thus, he is technically part of the Sandman legacy, but he did not operate as a superhero. His series was more of one giant character journey, and definitely is going to get a video in its own right later, as is an exceptional series, and Neil Gaiman is an exceptional author. We're definitely giving it some solo spotlight when it deserves it. But it is important to note that this series did apply some of its own retcons to not just that Garrett Sanford era, but the subsequent Hector Hall era, as well as tie up that Hector Hall as Sandman thing, which is important for later. Specifically, that while Hector Hall was operating as the Sandman and essentially being a ghost, we mentioned he had continued his loving relationship with Hippolyta Trevor, who would in fact become pregnant during one of these sessions, giving birth to Daniel Hall. However, the knowledge that her lover, Hector, was removed from her ability to visit with by the aforementioned Morpheus, and that Morpheus himself would later claim the baby, stating that as it was conceived in the dreaming, that it was a denizen of the dream dimension, and therefore his to claim. This would set Hippolyta down the trail of a nervous breakdown, pursuit of vengeance, and would factor into the final story arc of the Neil Gaiman Sandman series starring Morpheus, in which, long story short, Morpheus is slain and reincarnates through the already born Daniel Hall, making Daniel Hall the next version of Morpheus. Which is kind of weird, but it works because that entire series is a little weird. This means that Daniel Hall would be the next person to inherit the Sandman legacy, as he became Morpheus/Dream, and thus would occasionally use the term Sandman as the being that inspired the Sandman of myth. Meanwhile, Hector Hall would eventually be full-blown reincarnated back into the physical realm and would take up another legacy identity, this being the magician serving the gods of order known as Dr. Fate. This would allow him to reunite with Hippolyta. Eventually, they were both killed in the line of duty, and their souls were allowed to reside in the afterlife with their beloved son Daniel, due to them dying while passed out and thus dreaming. So they get a kind of sad but happy ending, as after years the family is reunited in eternity. However, since Daniel Hall did not use the term Sandman very often, and was definitely not doing it in a super heroic sense, heck, he himself did not even have his own starring series. He would merely show up every so often when the character was needed. We hit up on our final Sandman by going all the way back, all the way back, all the way back, and ending a cycle at the beginning, because a cycle is a circle. We mentioned that before his retirement and eventual death, Wesley Dodds did take on a sidekick known as Sandy the Golden Boy. Upon growing up and gaining some superpowers of his own that were more closely based to Marvel's Sandman, as in being a being made of sand, Sandy Hawkins would join a reunited version of the Justice Society of America that was a mix of the original members, other legacy heroes needing mentorship. However, he would often, instead of using the full Sandman codename, simply refer to himself as Sand. At one point, he would adopt an outfit that was highly reminiscent of the classic fedora gas mask look used by Wesley Dodds in his prime, and like Wesley Dodds, for a period experienced prophetic dreams that would help guide him to where he was needed. Sandy Hawkins would serve with this modern iteration of the Justice Society of America, including for a short time being the chairperson. before everything was all said and done, continuity was reset for Flashpoint New 52, and that's where I have to start getting a little negative towards DC. Shh, I didn't do that. Yep, down, boy. Down. And thus we have the long-lasting Sandman legacy. We go from a mystery man to a being of myth who is retconned as a man who gains superpowers by traveling from one dimension of mental and spiritual awareness to another, to a spirit being manipulated into playing hero after his mortal life ended, to the beings that are Dream, to the sidekick graduating and fully taking on the legacy of the original mentor, which is, in my humble opinion, the way most legacy identities should be handled. So, how did the Sandman rank? The original Wesley Dodd Golden Age stories were as good as anything from the Golden Age. They can be kind of awkward to read now because so much has changed culturally about, how we view entertainment. It's kind of like watching, movies from, the 40s, where it's like, okay, it is good storytelling, but there's just so much, it's just so different from the way we film movies now, and so different from the way we write comics now, because, back in the 40s, the idea of a shared universe hadn't really been established yet. The idea of an ongoing continuity that could last for decades, nobody contemplated. But Wesley Dodds is perhaps the most iconic of mystery men. In fact, that basic motif of fedora, buttoned up business suit look, and gas gun would later be revitalized, serving as the basic inspiration for Disney's Darkwing Duck in the 90s. Now, the Garrett Sanford thing, it's kind of awkward. Again, it was intended to be a one-off story that expanded out to 6 issues, was later dusted off to serve as a kind of sympathetic pseudo-villain for a handful of issues of Wonder Woman. But those interactions would, of course, later inspire other versions of it that kind of brought things up to a more serious, dramatic versions with Hector Hall in the hard life he led, trying to live up to his family's heroic legacy. Further channeled through his son Daniel Hall, all the way back to Sandy Hawkins. Now, I love the modern JSA series that Sandy Hawkins figured into. I think it was one of the most inspired things to do when you have, 60 odd years of continuity and characters that admittedly span 3 or more generations, depending on how you want to divide the generations. Personally, I would kind of say 4, because if you count, going by post-crisis, you would have the JSA, the JLA, the Titans, who by the time of this modern JSA series were already established, proven heroes in their own right, even if they were considered young heroes. So the newbies in the JSA that were just starting their career, yeah, they'd be like Generation 4. even though their legacies directly tie into Generation 1 more than 2 and 3 were their own connection. So, it's a thing. But it was a great idea, because it immediately gave the books a sense of depth in history that you don't get from creating a whole new batch of new heroes. Even if you do legacy up some identities, having the veteran Golden Age JSA members there, not just as literal teachers, but still working in the field alongside the younger heroes, really made it feel like you were watching history play out. The entire book was basically one giant salute to the idea of passing the torch on. So yeah, Sandy Hawkins, great character. Wesley Dodds, great character. Morpheus, and to a lesser extent, since he only appeared a relative handful of times, Daniel Hall, excellent storytelling and characterization. Definitely going to get its own detailed video discussion. Garrett and Hector, good for the bridging of continuity between the other versions, but as I said, Hector, pretty much his entire career was awkwardness. And him trying to fit in with various legacies. But you need that in comics sometimes, because again, that's part of what makes things feel realistic and relatable for readers is, there's a lot of people in the real world that have the problems Hector Hall did of, my dad's just so good at doing this thing, and I want to do it because I want to do what he does, and, as a show of respect. But I can't literally be him. I can follow some other similar people, kind of take a little bit from them, and I'm trying so hard, and I'm pushing myself so much, and there's just so much expectations on me, and I keep making dumb mistakes or flat out failing, and in one case dying and having to get reborn. That's more of a comic book thing than a real world thing. But, that's something very relatable to a lot of people. So, the entire Legacy's great. I would say probably Garrett Sanford's the weakest link. But, it served its place as kind of a transition legacy and something to inspire what was done with Hector Hall, and through that, helping set up the whole story of Morpheus and Daniel. So, mad props to all of those Hall of Fame legendary writers who contributed to the Sandman legacy. For now, though, we're going to wrap up. We're going to move on to a new topic. Keep track of this channel, because every Friday we are going to ramble. New topic every week. And in the meantime, in between times, check us out on Twitter at David Horridan. New things are coming up. Besides the rambling, besides the game streams that are also featured on this same channel. And we'll have more details about that later. For now, though, stay happy. Stay healthy. Even if you don't love something, at least respect it enough to constructively debate and criticize. Don't just hate and sneer. Because we are your break from the stress and anxiety. We are your break from frustration and anger. We are Roulette Productions. And we love entertainment and entertaining you. See you in 7.